The loudspeakers from the bell tower at the Presbyterian Church cast the sounds of faith across the streets of Khyberine. And from that very same tower, the highest vantage point in the town, the Cuban military set up their stations. They took their posts as they were getting ready for the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, of course, in Cuba, they refer to it as the Soviet Missile Crisis, that historic 1962 showdown between the United States and Soviet Union. The minutes of the Presbyterian Church actually narrate, they explain that the Cuban military came in and took over their bell tower to set up anti-aircraft guns. And so for 2 weeks, the gunners were up there alert and anticipating the attack of American bombers at any moment. Well, of course, that never happened. We're very fortunate that the standoff on the brink of war ended without any shots. Fortunately, the guns were removed from that bell tower of the church. And fortunately, eventually, the missiles were taken out of the ground in Cuba, the Soviet missiles. Interestingly, as we drove from the airport at Santa Clara, where we flew into, on the way out to Khyberine, with stops in Camawani and Remedios, our host pastor pointed to one of the hills, and he says that was the site for several of the Cuban missiles, the Soviet missiles in Cuba. Hi, I'm Pastor Jeff Hosmer. I serve at Northlake Presbyterian Church. And this past March, I was blessed to be part of a team that was going from our presbytery, a delegation of 4 of us at Northlake, along with, I think, 24 others from the presbytery, who were representing 8 different churches. And a great job was being done by our leaders. I'm just so grateful to Pat Zinn and Ken Lassiter and Randy Simpson for their leadership. And over the last decade, we have been linked together in the love and the mission of Jesus Christ. Pastor Edilberto is 70 years old, Pastor Edilberto Valdez. And for the last 16 years, he has served as pastor at Khyberine. He actually grew up very close by there in Remedios, and he has given his entire life to the church. He's one of my new heroes in faith. I love observing what he's done and the way in which he does it. He said to us several times, he says that the relationship between the Cuban church and the government is complicated. Then, of course, the relationship between the Cuban government and the United States government is complicated. And so any mission connection between Presbyterians in Florida and Presbyterians in Cuba, it's complicated, even though we're actually closer geographically to Havana than we are to Atlanta. And really, the Presbytery of Central Florida has been attempting to go for those deeper relationships in Central Cuba for a good while now. And 8 churches have either in place or in development partnership relationships or congregational agreements with churches in Central Cuba. Hopefully, Pastor Edilberto, who has been to the U.S. before, will be back and able to visit in Florida this fall. We'd like for him even to be able to visit us at our Presbytery meeting in September. There is a colossal shortage of leadership for pastors in that presbytery. Because of their distance from Havana and the nearest seminary, it's very difficult for them to attract and to retain pastors. We also heard their plight directly. The average salary for pastors now is slightly more than $50 a month. Of course, that would translate into pesos for them, but it means that most all of them have to find some other source of income to see them through the needs of a month, especially if they have family. And just since we visited in March, a very dynamic clergy couple with significant leadership roles in the presbytery, both decided to leave their respective churches and probably even to leave Cuba. And so, as a result, only 4 of the 12 churches in the presbytery have current pastoral leadership. And our team from the presbytery, as well as the Cuba Partnership Network for our denomination, and working with the church in Cuba, trying to come up with some strategies and some ways of sustaining quality leadership there. Friends, I cannot speak for all the members of the team who were there this March, and I can't even extrapolate from my own primary observations in Kaibarin. But what I saw in Kaibarin was strikingly different than anything I've ever seen before. A century ago, Kaibarin was really one of the most important port cities outside of Havana. And it was known for its beaches, known for its robust economy. Still today, it has a lovely coastline and, of course, the classic cars. And still today, there are elderly residents who remember when they had a very buoyant culture and economy. But today, Kaibarin is just a skeleton of its former glory. And huge piers are washed out into the sea. Warehouses are collapsed. Factories, sugar mills have closed. Uh, the whole area shows the signs of neglect, almost like a dystopic feel to it. Residents doubt the government's ability to get them out of this time of decline. And they don't see help coming from any other investors or enterprise. And so the sense of distress is keen. Add to that the widespread extensive blackouts, rampant inflation, and the fact that there's a scarcity of basic items like bread, which is only available on the black market. Members of our team who'd been there 5 and 6 years ago were noting major changes, deficits that have occurred. And there are, crumbling and vacant streets, boarded up businesses, and so many of the young people have left for good. Now, in the midst of that situation, in the midst of that bleakness, the Presbyterian Church in Kaibarin is remarkable. It's an anchor. It is a place where the light of Christ is shining. 3 days a week, they're providing filtered water. It's one of the very few places in Kaibarin where people can get quality, safe drinking water. One morning while we were there, we were watching as people lined up from before dawn to fill up water containers. One woman had come and filled up a half dozen 2-gallon containers, and she was putting them in her cart. And Pastor Alberto suggested that I might help her on the return trip to her home a few blocks away. And her name was Lily. She's 85 years old, and she was patiently guiding me through and around the potholes on the streets that she knew very well on that route. So what we take for granted at our faucets is a part of her morning ritual every Monday and Wednesday and Friday to make sure she has quality water. And that Presbyterian Church is one of the few places in the area that can do so, can provide it. They're also putting out meals, lunch meals for elderly members of the neighborhood, and a cancer support group, a sewing ministry, and a remarkably active youth group for those who are still in the area. So it's an amazing witness to Christ. They have a robust, palpable faith, and they are showing the love of Christ every day of the week. I am humbled by their zeal and commitment. It's true that despite all the odds and obstacles, it is well with their souls. If you're interested in learning more about the Northlake experience, I invite you to get in touch with me directly. If you're wanting to be a part of a next trip or maybe exploring a congregational partnership, you can start with the Presbyterian website. There's good information there, and talk to the leaders who are really at the forefront of this. I hope all of Presbytery will be supportive and even enthused about our Central Florida role in Central Cuba. And we're not responding to a missile crisis, fortunately, although international relationships are still a bit testy. But we are responding to a crisis in leadership and resources, and we can make a difference with God's help.